9. Schoolgirl chums. If you can keep your head while all about you are losing theirs. If. Rudyard Kipling. Dorry woke up. Everything was fine. She was in her bedroom, with the row of soft toys looking down at her and the pink bedspread tucked neatly up to her chin. Of course, the first thing she thought of was chocolate. Horrible stuff, she insisted to herself. Gives you spots, makes you fat. She was proud of her slim figure, worried that her thighs were getting a bit too porky. Pete, the nice one behind the bar at Spiffy's, had said that he thought she looked fine, but then he was a boy. He didn't have to see her in the mornings. She reached under the bed and pulled out a Mars bar. It had been hidden there in her secret hoard, along with a tattered Jackie Collins novel and a white suspender belt that Tricia had dared her into buying at Chelsea Girl. As she peeled the wrapper from the chocolate, Dorry shook her head slightly. She must have been dreaming because she remembered all sorts of strange things. She had been in Germany, and a soldier had been there. Something about a man with his mouth all taped up. Wonder what that meant. Alison had a book with all kinds of dreams in it, and what they meant. It'd be in there. Dorry didn't often dream, probably because she was so happy with everything. People with problems dreamt about those, and she was fine. "Dorry!" her mum shouted up the stairs. "Tricia's here to see you. Time to get up, love, even if it is Saturday." Dorry yawned and swung her legs over the end of the bed, pulling off her Care Bear nightshirt. "OK, Mum," she called. "She can come up in a minute." Dorry hit the button on her tape player and stared at herself in the mirror. Strange feeling. No words for it, really. As if the girl with the long plaited hair who stared back out of the mirror was somehow a surprise. The sensation was somehow familiar. That spot was still battling away on her chin. She set to it with the old cleansing lotion, wondering if she was going round the bend. Maybe she'd buy a new dress today, something to go clubbing in. She wanted to buy a single, though she had no idea what. Whatever Tricia bought, probably. Just as she'd finished pulling on her jeans, tucking in the brightly coloured blouse, Tricia popped her head around the door. "Hiya, Dorry. I've just been talking to your mum. She's made me a cup of coffee. She's really ace, isn't she?" "Really what?" Dorry frowned a bit as she looked at her best friend. Tricia was prettier than she was, maybe because she knew how to do makeup better. Her cheeks were a soft rose and her eyelids were flecked with gold. "Really sweet. She was talking about how your dad was working hard to get you three a nice holiday in Tenerife this year." "Great, yeah. I'm looking forward to it." "Maybe you'll find yourself a fit Greek waiter." Tricia dropped onto the bed and wiggled her feet in the air. "New trainers." "Great." Dorry tried to smile at the shining white and pink shoes, but a headache was pinching at her brow, and she didn't know. Well, Tricia was her friend, right? So why couldn't she remember that much about her? Oh yeah, she sat next to her in school, went out, sort of, with Martin Day, the football captain, and had taught Dorry to kiss up against the mirror, right? Still all fogged up from the dream. Wait a minute, Tenerife isn't in Greece, is it? I don't know, isn't it? I never really listened to what Mr. Freeman said in geography. He's far too sexy for me to pay attention to the maps and things. What do you think about his boys? Dorry moved Paddington aside and sat down next to Tricia. So do you. I saw you looking at Simon when they were playing Unchained Melody the other night. I wanted to dance. He was with that Elaine, though, and she's older than he is. A lot. He's 20 and she's 23. Tricia shook her head. That won't last then. You coming out? Sure. I look a bit of a mess, though. You look fine. You look like that girl in the film. What film? You know the one with that record by that guy. You'll remember, giggled Dorry, standing up and reaching for her pink anorak. Eventually. They wandered down the shopping street towards the shopping centre. Dorry was getting a bit scared now because she couldn't remember what the name of the city she lived in was. Her mum had kissed her on the cheek and told her to be back for tea, since Dad was bringing a surprise home that evening. Dorry pretended to wonder what it was, but guessed it was that kitten she'd been going on about. Who would she name it after? Mum had waved from the step, her apron covering the slight plumpness which marked the imminent arrival of Dorry's little sister. Maybe this was one of the last times Dorry would be able to go out easily. Soon she'd have to help out. She didn't mind. Now, what about this city? Oh no, Tricia muttered, glancing along the pavement ahead of them. A dirty youth in a dark coat, his hair tarred into a cluster of mangy dreadlocks, was approaching people as they walked by. "Give us some change, love," he asked them pathetically. "Got nowhere to sleep tonight?" Tricia looked up at him with her best bitchy stare, the kind that made boys blush and look at their feet. "Can't you get a job then?" she asked. "No," the lad managed to grin in return. "You need an address to do that, and I... Yeah, well, you ought to get one then, oughtn't you?" Tricia stalked off and took Dorry by the arm. "Look at him. He can afford to tattoo that A thing on the back of his hand, but he's asking us to give him money. My mum says they're all child molesters, those. Did you see he had a big penta thing on the back of his coat? No, don't look back. He might come after us." Giggling, the two girls ran the rest of the way to the shopping centre. The Reverend Trelaw was still upset, Emily knew. He had emptied a box of biscuits put aside for the church poor appeal and had carefully placed the head in the box, replacing the lid with scarcely a grimace. "I don't want to add to the indignity of all this," he had muttered, "but I have no other container." Emily hardly knew what to do. She knew that the attempt to talk to the head had failed, but felt quite powerfully that she had done exactly the right thing. She had a sense, somehow, of a powerful process of change being set in motion. "Well, what do we do now?" asked Peter. He had been attempting to play with the baby, but the infant didn't respond to any of his tricks. It wasn't even interested in his efforts to hide behind a pillar and then reappear again. Wasn't that supposed to be one of those basic things that babies caught on to? "I don't know," Emily said, pacing the aisle, her hands clasped before her. "I feel as if Ace and the doctor are a bit better off because of what we did, but I don't know why." "Something has changed," confirmed Saul. "Something about the nature of the transmission." "You're still getting it?" Emily was surprised. "Indeed. In its old version, without the extra power or lyrics, but it seems clearer than it originally did, as if some interference had been removed." "Well, that's good then." Peter gazed out across the lunar landscape from the window. "Isn't it?" The Timewyrm was trying to reassess its territory. The area of the datascape it had given to Hemmings was in a chaotic state, changing by the moment, rolling like a thunderhead, denying interface to any monitor it attempted to plant. This was random space from the outside, impossible for the Timewyrm to view. An unmonitored internal datum had been given control of the place, creating a self-referential loop of information. What was going on inside was, by nature, a mystery. Was the doctor in that area? If not, where had he gone? The map was metaphorically flexing, changing its layout and its nature. The doctor was not to be found anywhere. His personal data signature might have been somewhere out there, but the Timewyrm was still trying to get used to the changed nature of the datascape. Never mind the billowing chaos that had erupted in the one where the doctor had been. Ishtar provided an apt metaphor. The doctor was like an Azukoi, a creature from Anu, a household pest which could slip in and out of cracks and survive despite everybody's best efforts to kill it. Mouse, the Timewyrm accessed. Cheese. Bait. Traps. Cat. The virus accessed Boyle's playground, glad that it still had control over one sector at least, and found its pawns surrounded by an adoring crowd of younger children as he told a story. If it had waited a moment more, the worm would have discovered that Boyle was telling his own story in legendary terms. A hero had been captured by a fierce dragon and had fought it until it had to leave him alone and went away. The worm hadn't time to listen. The chaotic explosion of data had given the doctor a breathing space. He would make use of it to escape. He would head for the pit at the centre of the map. He had told his companion that he was planning to descend into it, probably thinking that that way lay escape. Fool, blind, random fool. That was the last place he could find sanctuary. He would expect the worm to try and attack him on his journey there. The worm shunted Boyle's data from his little playground heaven towards the map. Maybe it had lost Hemmings, but it still had the boy, and one agent would be enough. Enough to crush the doctor's most distant hopes. Dorry and Tricia were trying on clothes, taking turns to swish out of the changing rooms in some amazing party dresses. "What do you think?" giggled Tricia, as she smoothed down a lilac and cream number. "It's not you," Dorry smiled. "It needs some more tassels or a floral design. It's too... Yeah, too classy." Tricia pretended to be hurt. Know what you mean, dear. Still, can't live all your life in jeans, can you? They wandered past posters covering a dead shop. It was a beautiful day and the sun was shining. The posters fought with each other, competing for limited space, limited pockets. How many of these have you heard of? Tricia ran a red nail along the hoarding. Happy Mondays, yeah? Tricia squidged up her face. Yeah, dunno how come they're so successful. Look like they're a bit, well, dodgy, not nice. Voivod, no, Jason Donovan. She smiled. Well, I used to know who he was. Tricia laughed. He's a prat. You used to like him too. I never did. I only said I liked him because Tracy Dodds liked him. Me too. Tracy Dodds went away, didn't she? Yeah, went to university. Always was a bit stuck up. Too good for us, Dorry. I saw her after she came back, end of term like, and she'd gone all political. She told me she was a feminist now. She even asked if I was. So I told her that I like boys, actually. Something funny there. She probably still likes Jason Donovan, if she likes anybody. Dorry and Tricia laughed their heads off and hugged. Dorry's headache was getting worse, but it was good to have Tricia there. They'd been best friends ever since they'd shared a desk in the third form. Tricia had a good sense of humour, and she always had time to listen to her. She also knew how to snap Dorry out of her moods. It isn't good to think too much, she'd say. Thinking only gets you depressed. Dorry flapped the ragged end of a poster with her finger. New model army. They're a bit political, aren't they? Yeah. Tricia wrinkled her nose in distaste. They don't think that anybody should have any money. My dad says people like that usually have loads themselves. I mean, I think politics are boring, but they're all the same, aren't they? But I like Mrs. Thatcher. She's a woman-like, so she must have known what she was doing. Right, Dorry nodded, frowning. Was that true? She didn't know, but something in her had kicked at the idea. They'd come to the end of the posters, and she had a moment of panic over what they could possibly do now. It was like she was running away from something that was following her through the streets, waiting for her to stop moving. Look, can we go to the record shop later? I want to go to the library first. The library? Tricia frowned, puzzled. All right, lovely. As they walked away, a red line appeared across one of the posters, cutting bloodily across Jason Donovan's hairdo with a fuzzy crimson dash. 3 lines crisscrossed into a rough A. The library was a dull place, full of dull books like they got you to read in school. The only books that Dorry and Tricia liked were pop annuals. Adult novels were too big and took you ages to read, and were usually boring. Fact books made you aware of things that you didn't want to be aware of. Kids' books were stupid. So what you looking for? Tricia glanced along the racks and immediately hid behind one. Look out, it's takeaway! Dorry didn't remember who this was supposed to be, so she poked her head around the corner of the bookcase and found herself being smiled at by a young Asian girl who was talking to some of her friends in the record section. Dorry quickly smiled back and ducked round the rack again. Didn't she recognise the girl from somewhere? Oh God, she saw me, she whispered. Well, I just hope she doesn't come over, muttered Tricia, adjusting her hairband. I mean, I'm not prejudiced, but, well, she smells, doesn't she? And like my dad says, they're not like us, are they? She's always going on about that music of theirs that all sounds the same. Tricia said some more things, not all of which Dorry really agreed with, but she supposed that Tricia's dad knew what he was talking about. She didn't want to argue with a friend about something as stupid as politics anyway. Besides, she had spotted a book on the shelf in front of her. This somehow was what she had been after. It was elegantly bound in black and white with a complex spiral pattern on the outside. Dorry pulled it out, no longer listening to a friend, and opened it. I was 21 years old when I wrote this place, it said on the inside cover. I don't feel my age. I don't feel like Ace. Ace. That word again, like whoever wrote this book knew about her, knew about this comforting world where you only had to swallow cotton wool to stay alive, only to discover that it was really fiberglass. Itchy, hard in your throat, poison in your guts. A sick set of words ready to spill out and burn everything down. Burn it all down. I mean, I don't go to church or anything, but I suppose I believe in God. And what that lot do, gods with elephants' heads and all that, well, it's wrong, isn't it? Suffering, Dorry turned the first page of the book. It was headed Chapter 1, Little Dorrit, and it began with a big illuminated T. In the swirling letters stood 2 tiny clowns, just like the ones Dorry enjoyed watching at the circus. They were throwing bread buns at each other. Dorry put a finger on the page and read, her lips moving slightly. This is what she read. The ferryman slid his pole into the brackish water and pushed. The punt moved forward. "Are you going to pay me?" he asked, his voice cultured and full. "It's traditional, and I think in this situation we should respect tradition." Against the bleakness of the dark river, the ferryman's bohemian costume stood out a mile. His scarf looped around his 2 passengers in a multicoloured spiral, and his greatcoat flapped in the stiff breeze that lapped the water into little waves. A distant landscape behind him flickered with arcade neons, blue flaring buildings outlined in a rabid city of night. "Do get a move on, there's a good fellow," the third Doctor muttered, annoyed. "We haven't much time." "Time?" The ferryman's voice grew a trifle louder, as if he was talking to an undergraduate. "If we had world enough and time, well, I'd show you my lodgings. My study's full of information, but that's what studies are for, isn't it?" "That's why I asked you to meet us," murmured the 7th Doctor. "You were investigating the Matrix. While Ace has this place in chaos, you can get me to where I want to go." "He knows just about as much as I do," sulked the 3rd Doctor. "He could have found a boat with an engine at least." "An engine?" cried the ferryman. "An engine which would disturb the water. Interesting not only what's in the water. Do you know what's in the water?" "My dear chap," began the 3rd Doctor, "I seldom venture onto the rivers between the zones." "Well, perhaps you should. In these rivers live things I wouldn't joke about. They form a basic barrier between zones, a security system to prevent the occupants meeting." "I dare say that might be a very good idea." "You kept the Timewyrm out of your sector," the 7th Doctor murmured to the ferryman, not bothering to suppress a slight smile. "How?" "Oh, well, you know, I just keep on my toes," the ferryman blustered. Then his voice hardened. "How are you going to defeat it, Doctor?" "I don't know. Not yet." "Well, if you ask me, and I mean I'm not the greatest expert about this sort of thing, but I've been around a bit—" "Stop prevaricating and get on with it, man," snapped the 3rd Doctor. "I've explained the nature of the problem to him." "I'd say," the ferryman gazed into the distance, "that you need to fight the Timewyrm on its own ground, so to speak. It's a fundamental principle, after all. The universe has adapted to it, perhaps even used it to bring the blue shift closer. You might as well put on full armour and attack a banana split or a donut." "Useless," sighed the 3rd Doctor. "Exactly," murmured the ferryman. "We're here." And surprisingly, they were. The punt slid to a halt on a darkling shore, shiny black pebbles rustling aside as the craft landed. "The central zone," murmured the Doctor. "Here be dragons." He stepped onto the shore and gazed out across the forbidding landscape ahead. Barren moorland stretched as far as the eye could see, lashed by the first gusts of the oncoming storm. "Good." He turned, looking determined, and addressed his 2 fellow travellers. "You had better get back to your zone, and you," he looked keenly at the 3rd Doctor, "what are you going to do?" "What I should have done a long time ago." The 3rd Doctor looked back steadily, with only a hint of injured pride. "Fight the Timewyrm when I have to. I'd like to assist that young lady of yours." "She's not mine," the Doctor muttered darkly. "She may not be rescued. I forbid it. She's facing the same situation that you did, that we all did." Yes, the white-haired Doctor sighed. "I was just wishing, old fella. Perhaps I was wishing that somebody had helped me face my demons sooner. Then we wouldn't be in this mess." "I doubt it." The Doctor frowned, his face contoured in worry. "We all have our crosses to bear. I have the feeling sometimes that I'm being taught a hard lesson." He turned and, without a word of farewell, strode into the central zone. The 2 occupants of the barge watched him depart. "I'd better be going," said the ferryman. "Shall I take you back?" "Yes," replied the 3rd Doctor pensively. "Tell me, when you give such good advice, why do you act like such a fool?" "Oh," smiled the ferryman secretly, "when a wise man gives thee better counsel, give me mine again. I would have none but knaves follow it, since a fool gives it." "I've taken too little care, haven't I?" mused the 3rd Doctor quietly, catching the allusion. "Yes." The ferryman let his answer hang in the chill air for a time as he paddled away. After a while, he added, more gently, perhaps we all have. Dorry looked up from the book, and it was evening. Tricia was sitting on a chair reading Bride's magazine. There was nobody else in the library. They were getting ready to lock up for the night. Tricia looked up and grinned. I thought you'd never finish, she exclaimed, taking the book out of Dorry's hands and shoving it back on the shelf. Come on, we're going out tonight, remember? But I'm not, Dorry began to say, and looked down to discover that she was in her black frock. Her face was made up too. Don't touch your mascara, Tricia scolded her and hustled her off into the waiting streets. Peter Hutchings closed the ragged old children's book that he had been leafing through. It was one of the presents that was to be sent out to the poor of the parish of Chilton Boniface. It made him think of the children that he wanted and now would probably never have, the life that he would probably soon lose too. I don't think that children's stories have much to offer us now, he sighed. We're such a long way from home. I don't know, said the Reverend Trelaw. These were the first words he had spoken in half an hour. He had been praying by himself, clearly disturbed by the business of the head. Now he stood up and stretched. Most parables are children's stories, you know. He looked at Emily carefully, weighing up how he felt. Forgive me, he said finally. You were only doing what you thought was necessary. That's not a good excuse, said Emily, looking down at the floor. It never has been. We should be asking you to forgive us. The Reverend smiled and put a hand on her shoulder. We'll regard it as mutual then, he said gently. Saul sang a little scale that was his equivalent of laughter. Peter smiled too. It was heartwarming. Perhaps in this situation he could take that to be literal, because his heart certainly felt warm. In fact, he leapt up and pulled the medallion that the doctor had given him from the breast pocket of his jacket. The others looked up, startled as he dropped it, sucking his fingers. It lay shining red-hot on the church floor. Oh dear, murmured Saul. Strange things are happening again. The doctor stalked across the empty landscape, the winds howling around him. The sky was darkening with the approaching storm, and the doctor was leaning heavily on his umbrella as he walked. He shivered occasionally, and his face sometimes contorted in pain, as if a particularly unpleasant memory had come to mind. Old friend, he muttered, I see what your words meant. Protect me now, for I go into the dark. And walking beside him, or so it seemed, was the one-eyed old man in the cape, his frail form impervious to the blast of the winds and their terrible howling. My child, rumbled the ghostly hermit, my elder and my contemporary. How fare you? Badly. The doctor didn't look at the phantom of the storm, but kept his eyes on the hummocky ground. I've left her, deliberately. She may stay there. I don't know what her situation is. I can't control it. There are always things that you cannot control, the ghost murmured, its voice wavering with the storm. You chose your way, and now she must choose hers. She is good? Yes. And the Timewyrm is evil? Yes. Evil beyond anything I imagined. It may be immortal, beyond my ability to destroy it. The doctor stopped, his face contorting with a sudden, inexplicable fear. I might lose this time. I might lose the battle, lose her. C'est la vie, rumbled the shade. One life for billions. Isn't that a reasonable cost? C'est la guerre, spat the doctor. It's the same thing, the dark form sighed. I wish I could offer you advice, doctor, but this is the realm of dreams, the place of dread conflict. I have no power here. And you aren't real either. Shuddering, the doctor began his march once more. You're just a fiction of my invention. True, true, as he faded on a sharp breeze. But just because people aren't real doesn't mean that you can't talk to them. Lightning split the sky with a roar, and a chill downpour of icy rain began to splatter the earth into mud. Dorry had been dancing to Kylie, but the DJ had put on a tune that none of the girls who were gathered in the corner liked. Tricia had lit up a cigarette, which she smoked because they kept her slim, and they were looking around the disco, sizing up the talent. Or Sylvie, Jane, Sharon and Tricia were. Dorry was drinking spirits, not sniffing them quickly like Sylvie did, and listening to the tune she couldn't dance to. It was called In Between Days, Dave the DJ had said, and it carried with it a kind of longing, a distant ache. He's nice! Tricia was glancing quickly over her shoulder at a boy who was leaning on the bar. A blonde crew cut and sharply cut chinos. He had a mouthful of shining teeth and he looked rich but normal in the way Tricia liked them. "He's well, lovely." "Don't say well anything," Sharon scolded. "It's not good English." Her dad was an English teacher and she was always joking about it, having them on. "Sorry, I'm too stupid to use good English," smiled Tricia in a sweet voice. The others giggled, but something inside Dorry made her frown. "Doesn't matter," she muttered under her breath. "No such thing as good English. Language changes, right? Changes all the time, like it's alive. You're not stupid for that. You're stupid because you think you should be." "What?" Tricia asked above the music. "Don't you think he's cute?" "He's okay," grinned Dorry, trying to enjoy herself. "If you like them like that." "Well, what do you like?" asked Sharon. Dorry rubbed the bridge of her nose distractedly. "I like to dance," she murmured. "I want to be free to do what I want to do." "What are you saying?" asked Tricia more loudly. "You want to dance to this crap? God, you must be pissed." "I'm saying... I don't know what I'm saying. I think I want to go." She stood up and walked around the dance floor to the door. "Oh, what a time to throw a wobbly," sighed Tricia. "Come on then, we'd better follow her, girls." The doctor had his arms up in front of his face, shielding himself from the blast of the storm. Voices seemed to yell and scream around him as he approached the mountain that loomed in the distance. "Traitor!" they screamed. "User! Hypocrite!" "I am not," the doctor tried to shout back, but his words were sucked away by the wind. Water was blasting down on him now, and he was soaked, mud clawing at his coat and trousers. His face was bleeding and scarred from bulleting hail, and the scratch the Timewyrm had given him was livid with fever. He stumbled and nearly fell, staring at the question-mark handle of his umbrella as if it were all he had to support him. Through the red circle of the handle he saw a figure. The Timewyrm had planted Boyle here a while ago, not bothering to discover the doctor's escape route. He had told his companion, after all, that he would be heading for the pit. The boy had been kicking divots out of the ground since then, bored and increasingly angry. Chad was carrying a sword, laughing in the storm now that he had sighted his prey. The boy was screaming his mirth at the sky and wore a suit of gleaming armour. His teeth came together in a biting smile as he saw the doctor tottering towards him. "Big Professor!" he called in his voice, wheezing with the laughter in it. "Dangerous man! Great hero! Aren't you strong? Only a little way to go now, eh?" The doctor desperately looked over his shoulder, looking for cover. "You found me," he gasped. "How? I thought... You thought we wouldn't know where you were going." Chad strode forward through the flattened and whipping grass. "We know everything, me and my angel." "Listen to me." The doctor glared at the armoured figure. "You're being used. The Timewyrm is using us all, playing us against each other." I don't care," shouted Boyle, tired with the doctor's words. "She gave me what I wanted. Now it's home time. Time for you to die." The boy raised his sword and stepped forward like a butcher. Dorry flung herself flat against the corner of the building and felt the drizzle on her face. Please let it wake her up. Please, she wanted to know where reality began and dreams ended. She wanted to know why her friends and her life were making her so sick. The girls hustled out of the doors of the nightclub and began to fuss around her, putting arms around her shoulders, helping her along. Here was all the help she wanted. They'd get her home, they'd make sure that her lovely mum, her mum, and lovely dad in their lovely house would make everything lovely. Nice, 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 all nice. Warmth of bodies and friendship supported her. Let her totter along on her white stilettos. Her feet didn't hurt because of fashion, and her passion didn't hurt because of common sense. You didn't argue with the world with normal life. If you wanted to be different, you did it somewhere else, not in the city. You went off to be weird. The scream came from nearby, and the girls all stopped and quickly turned to walk the other way. They walked Dorry with them. She twisted her head, desperately trying to see. 4 boys were standing over someone, backed against the same wall she had been leaning on. It was the girl she had seen in the library, desperately trying to get away from her attackers. "Come on, best not to get involved," muttered Tricia. "She was probably asking for it anyway. They're probably all friends of hers." Dorry felt that sharp pain against her forehead again. Christ, all she'd wanted was a home, a few mates, a place where she didn't have to fight. She didn't have to fight. No, she could just walk away and it would all be fine. All it required was silence, acceptance, a bit of common sense. Oh, damn common sense. Dorry broke away and dived towards the fight. The girls shrieked and panicked, running in all directions. The boys at the wall looked up from their prey and laughed to see this girlie in her frock and party shoes, weeping as she sprinted in their direction. "What's up, darling? You want to join us?" shouted one of them, a jokey smile from above his expensive sportswear. "Yeah!" grinned Dorry, as she flew past and hacked him aside with the blunt end of one stiletto, plucked from her foot into her hand. He went down, clutching his forehead. Pure chance that. Should have been the heel. Before the other three could react, one of them had a bunched fist in his stomach, smashed him with the weight of Dorry's run, and the other was flying towards the ground, a foot having caught him in the groin. When the injured assailants got up, they ran away. The last man didn't know where to turn. He retreated up against the wall, grinning hopelessly. "Look, it was just a bit of fun, wasn't it, eh?" The Asian girl was looking up at Dorry, and there was a kind of recognition in her eyes, as if her rescuer was an old friend. That was impossible, wasn't it? It wasn't like Dorry knew her name beyond takeaway. It would be something confusing and hard to say. There were words you couldn't say. There were films you couldn't see. There were people you couldn't know. There were ideas you couldn't think. Not if you wanted to fit in. Not if you wanted to be part of the world. Dorry slammed the man up against the wall, her hands on his collar. "What's her name?" she screamed. "What's her name?" "I dunno," the man shouted. "My name," the woman looked up at Dorry with trusting, anciently powerful eyes, "is Manisha." Dorry stared down at her. A shiver convulsed in her face. "My God, forgive me, I forgot." She released her grip, and the man sprinted away, sobbing into the night. "Manisha, I'm not the one who has to forgive you." The smiling young woman rose and opened her palms. In them was cupped a pure red fire, impervious to the little drops of rain that were blowing down on this cold and dirty alley. "You were injured in the fire," Dorry muttered. "Was that a story, or was that—" "Your memories are a story," Manisha smiled. "A good story, too." At a distance, the girls had regrouped, gazing at the scene, not knowing quite what to say. "Dorry," Tricia called. "Come on, love, let's get you home." And then, a second later, as if she couldn't resist it, "Say goodnight to the packy." The young woman stared at the fire that magically fluttered in front of her. She could feel it now, the pain that she had wanted to rid herself of, welling up inside. She turned and glared at the girls, shivering in their skirts, tapping their tiny feet on this tiny planet, ignoring the storm and awaiting their homes. "Her name," she shouted, wincing at the difficulty of swimming against the tide, "is Manisha Perkayashtha, and my name isn't Dorry." She looked up at the sky above and yelled it as loudly as she'd ever yelled anything in her life. "My name is Ace!" And she hit her fist into the wall, the pain jolting up her arm. She hit again and again until the blood flowed onto her fingers. Manisha vanished into a haze of pain, letting the fire free like a child releasing a butterfly. The fire consumed Ace's vision, and the streets and dirty towers and shopping centres began to explode with it in great gouts of flame. In front of Ace on the wall, a scarlet A was forming, splashed out of her own blood. As she smashed at the wall, the blood spilled into the brickwork, streaming with fury. C and E splashed up against the wall. Light burnt from around the brickwork, an outline of a door, an idea of a door. And maybe that was one of the things you weren't allowed to think in this world, was a door, a way to change things, a painful fight for difference. The light defined a door marked Ace, and Ace rammed her way through it, and the world collapsed behind her. Somewhere amongst the falling buildings stood a dashing white-haired figure. He had been a busker on these mean streets, playing a whistle and watching as the crowds wandered by regardless, not a penny on his cape. Having returned from the river, he had bided his time, a storybook figure in a world which to him was just as much a story. Now he stood to his full height and took control of the world as Ace departed. As the winds and burning buildings warped to his raised hands, he spared a grin for the running companion. "Well done," he said simply. "Now go and win the war." Ace blasted down a corridor of doors, each one showing a different symbol. The pentagram, the pink triangle, the black flag and the raised fist. She ran through every door, and with every step things got better. Her stride became firmer, her clothes became her own, her rucksack and jacket grew back on her arms and back, and her mind filled with proud knowledge. Ahead of her, a final door was glowing, etched with 3 runes, a square spiral, a bent S, and a horizontal bowl. Behind the door, a voice was shouting for her, needed her. "Professor!" Ace shouted, rushing for the door. The doctor had gone down on the first blow, the grip of the sword smashing across his forehead. The boy had thrust the Time Lord's face into the mud, nearly drowning him, and then had pulled him to his feet by the collar, nearly choking him, before throwing him once more to the ground. Blinded, struggling to regain his feet, slipping in the mud, the doctor called vainly to Chad Boyle. "Stop it! Stop it! It mustn't end like this! This isn't the way!" All Boyle could do was laugh. "Isn't it? You've lost it, old man. You've lost Dotty. You've lost your mind. You've lost everything. You're a small boy. You don't even want to harm me. Not really." The doctor growled, stumbling to his feet. He felt a hard, small hand on his arm and leant against it, trying to stand straight. He put a hand to the face of his attacker. "Look me in the eye. Use your sword. Take my life." "Well," snarled Chad Boyle, "you said it." The sword thrust straight through the doctor's side, and blood boiled out of the wound, splattering onto the muddy ground. The doctor doubled up around Boyle's firmly held blade and bellowed in agony. "You're finished," laughed the child. "Who's gonna save you now?"